Howdy, folks. I'm Caleb, and welcome to Influ-Men-Sirs, the podcast where we explore influential men and their influence on men and the broader conversation around masculinity as a whole. Today, we'll be discussing the GOATs of basketball, Michael Jordan himself. I already probably upset some of you listening, but whatever. We'll get to it. But yes, before we start, let us give a brief intro to my fellow Influ-Men-Sirs. So I will be passing the ball, so to speak, to each of you, and you just give me your name, vocation, and what brings you to the space. So let's start with Seth.
All right. Seth Jardine, or more fondly known as Coach G. I have spent close to 16 years coaching, 11 of which were at the collegiate level, NCAA, NAIA. And then I've also had the opportunity to officiate at high levels from D3 all the way up to the NBA DL. Now it's the G League, but back then it was the Development League. Currently in my last class for my PhD program, and this is going to touch on my thesis, or my dissertation, I should say.
You were perfectly brought into this space. You fit very, very well. Awesome. All right, Michael, but not the Michael.
Yeah, not that one. My name is Michael. I'm a licensed counselor associate in both Oregon and Washington. I went to school with Caleb. I think the whole topic of masculinity is really interesting, not just from my own personal journey of the last 5 to 10 years, but culturally speaking, we're trying to figure out what the heck it means to be a man in today's political and social and cultural climate. And so just really interested to be a part of a group of guys who are talking about that and trying to figure out what it means for them as well as everybody else.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. He's also an excellent counselor. Excellent. Awesome. All right, Frank, top us off.
Hey, my name is Frank Jardine. I am actually a brother to Seth Jardine. My background is in sport and exercise psychology, so we wrestle with topics of masculinity all of the time. I work with more closely with the statistical side of sport and exercise psychology, not necessarily the therapeutical side. But what interests me in this particular topic is, what is defined as masculinity and how does it change from even sport to sport? So that now that we're exploring Michael Jordan, I think this is going to be a very interesting topic, especially because there is a debate going on who is the GOAT. So, yeah.
Seems like it's pretty unanimous on this side of things, but whatever. Well, actually, I don't know, but it seems that way from our little text thread thus far. But yes, so my name is Caleb Keller. I am a therapist based in Portland, Oregon. I work in primarily men's issues, trauma, and then also neurodivergence. What brings me to this space is basketball has been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. People really close to me kind of taught it to me. That's part of my passion for it. And yeah, I just love all things hoops. I knew exactly where I was when I was 6 years old and MJ hit his jumper on Brian Russell in Game 6. That is a fond core memory where I was, particularly with my brother, who I'm sure I will mention on and off. But yeah, that's what brings me to this space today. But yeah, so kind of what I figured we'd do. It's interesting because when we've done this before, when I start here, I just give a little like Wikipedia on whoever we're reviewing. I don't need to go very, very much on this guy. I think we have a pretty crystal clear image of who we're dealing with here. But yes, Michael Jordan, probably one of the most influential men of all time. Probably the most of the 90s at the very least. And yes, the most influential basketball player of all time. 6-time champ, 6-time finals MVP. And I literally wrote all these other things, but y'all already know. Y'all already know. So he is also a very successful businessman and cultural icon. He's beloved by many a 90s kid, which I think we're all to one degree or another here, 90s kids. But he's beloved by a very select few teammates, which I'm sure we will talk about as well. But yes, Jordan casts a shadow that even 2 decades removed from being on the court can't be denied. Compared to other fellows we've discussed, most everyone in the world knows about Mike and wants to be like Mike. So, on that corny segue, let's start with this simple question. What do we think about this fellow? Let's start with Frank.
Michael Jordan is, especially for a figure in the 90s, he is, or, was at the time, like a very, he was the embodiment of masculinity, especially when it came to sports. I mean, this guy is a guy who wanted to win at everything, at any cost. He smoked cigars, he drank, he ate crappy food and then just went to the game the next day and dropped 40. Like his reputation was don't talk trash to him because then he'll drop another 40 in the next half. Like this guy was not just egotistical, he backed it up. I mean, from the time that he was in high school and got cut from the varsity team, he made sure that that was never going to be in question ever again. And to this day, if his high school coach is still alive, I'm sure he regrets that decision. But that was just something that Michael Jordan wanted to make sure that anybody who was a naysayer or doubted him, like regretted that decision. His ego would not allow him to be second at anything. And so he was the embodiment of 90s, late 80s masculinity at a time where we had Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger coming out of rivers and mowing down entire villages. This guy was that, but on the sports spectrum. We talk about Muhammad Ali and we talk about, all these other GOATs in sports. The biggest difference between Michael Jordan and all these other GOATs is, we talk about Muhammad Ali because he took down Frazier, he took down the monster. Michael Jordan was the monster and you couldn't take him down. So he was that person. And so like exploring that type of masculinity, is very interesting to see because he captured the zeitgeist of the 90s, the consumerism. Everything was about me. Everything was, how do I better myself? I mean, we see the issues of it now, 30 years later, but at the time, he was everything for that.
Indeed. 45 wasn't quite 23, but, that's neither here nor there. So that was a bad joke.
Yeah,
I'm going to just do all these corny jokes. I apologize. All right, Michael, what you got?
I feel like it's gonna piggyback off a lot of what Frank was just saying. I mean, yeah, he was the icon of all icons. Like you did not question him. I mean, he's essentially godlike, right? I mean, there's a mythical component about him, especially because he lives such a private life. He's not like some of these other athletes who remain public. He's very, very secretive. And so you create this mystical, godlike character of him. You throw in all those statistics of undefeated in the finals, MVPs across the board, and it sort of feeds into that whole narrative of who he is. But yeah, I mean, he was to the maximum a perfectionist, and he, we'll get into this a little bit later, but was obviously polarizing in how he led his team and how he did things. But in terms of a cultural impact, I mean, it was massive. I mean, I'm sure you all have seen I can't remember the Nike movie, but how Nike was a flailing business, and then the Jordan brand came around, and it just skyrocketed them, and they've basically been untouchable ever since because of this guy. His impact was essentially immeasurable. The guy did everything he wanted to do on the basketball court, and essentially in the business world as well, being a billionaire and all that kind of stuff. So, he is. I mean, just Michael Jordan. He's the GOAT. I mean, you look at him, the bald head, just the swagger, I think I can't remember which ear he had pierced, but the earring and all that stuff. I mean, he was the fashion, the style, the confidence. I mean, he had it all. And alongside of that, there was some negatives, but those kind of get hidden under a lot of the winning, right? So, yeah, that's kind of my brief take on the guy.
What you got, Seth?
To kind of piggyback on what Frank and Michael were discussing. People hear rumors about Michael Jordan, or they hear stories about Michael Jordan and not realizing what that actually meant in the 90s, right? So, we still hear that entrance music, right, for the Bulls as they're doing, like, everything that Michael Jordan did had aura about it. So what you're going to see, Michael Jordan as he goes through the 90s, from the entrance music to Space Jam, right? Like, and realistically speaking, you look back at Space Jam, it's an okay movie, but it's such a cult, it has such a cult following, and people still go back to it. And it's not just a Looney Tunes movie, right? It's a basketball movie. And even the movie itself, when LeBron James decided to do a sequel, the LeBron James sequel was never going to live up to the original Michael Jordan, right? And it just seemed like everything Michael Jordan touched turned into gold when it came to basketball. And we'll touch on this obviously a little bit later, but a lot of what his attitude was about and is about, and what his mantra is, I carry on to this day, as I'm sure a lot of other athletes our ages carried on, right? And Derek Jeter was in the same era as Michael Jordan, and he's quoting Michael Jordan, right? Like, you're talking about a bona fide first ballot Hall of Famer realizes the greatness of that. And so when kids today, there's this clip of Michael Jordan where he's at a birthday party and he has to go hit a free throw. And he's like, man, I haven't shot in, 10 years. And he goes, I don't want to miss this free throw because all these kids have heard, from their fathers of how great I was. And he goes up to the free throw line, bounces it 3 times, nothing but net, right? Like, and that's who Michael Jordan is. Like, he's gonna live up to the hype. And a lot of this stuff I bring into coaching. I recruit in the manner of which, and I hate saying it this way, but I recruit in the manner of which Michael Jordan raised me to, right? Like, in the sport. So Michael Jordan is a lot larger than the sport itself.
Yes. Yeah, I think that largeness is something that all three of you have hit on, that I think was kind of the key to it all. There was, and is, something to the way he carried himself, the way that, and again, I'm sure we'll speak to this quite a bit, but the capacity that he drove to motivate himself, it was always, very much in the spirit of competition. I don't think, in the same way that he's the GOAT of basketball, he might be the GOAT of competition. Because as you can see, and I'm sure all of us have seen, and many of us have seen The Last Dance, and probably so many times at this point, but just other media of him as well, there is this, what he publicly has stated multiple times, is a problem with competition. He even kind of, like, with a smile on his face and chuckling, says, I have a competition problem. So it's funny because on the very, very lane, something that I do on this pod is I like to look at things through the grid of personality at times, just to give us a framework for how and why a particular figure might blow up the way that they want to. And I swear what I'm about to read was not necessarily with MJ in mind. It's literally just this person and the way that they describe a personality. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the guy. This is the dude.
This is him.
So he is what I would call, according to the Enneagram, it's a system that I really enjoy. So he's called a type 8. And within a particular form of type 8, they say they have a strong rebellious tendency and like to be the center of things. More provocative and passionate than the other type 8s, because there's a bunch of different kinds. They like to have power over people and situations. So when I read that, I thought, yeah, that sums up so much of the way in which he got 6 rings, right? And he got 6 finals MVPs and all that kind of stuff. But it felt like, I want to show you I'm better than Clyde. I want to show you I'm better than Barkley. I want to show you I'm better than Malone. Obviously, the winning of it all was, what he would describe was the most important. But it felt like, and it's something that we've all hit on in one way or another, the motivation had this personal quality. This other hooper that I admit is a good hooper, he's not as good as me, and I'm going to show you on the court. All right, so now we're going to kind of switch gears here a little bit. I am going to ask this. What do you think, MJ, the GOAT, seems to state directly or indirectly about what defines being a man? Let's start with Michael.
That's a good question. I was just actually looking at. I'm a visual guy, so you'd sent me the questions. I was looking that over. I don't know if I have ever heard him directly say anything about what it means to be a man or any of those things. Maybe in the realm of, I think in The Last Dance he talks about taking things personal. That's the huge, the famous quote from from that whole thing was, he took it personal, right? He took everything personal. So I think I'm going to take this from from an indirect approach of just who he was and who he carried himself to be. I think I think we've used the term competitive and ultra winning, and there's a hyper individualness to him, right? He's hyper individualistic, and so I think, especially coming from that era, a lot of guys were all about that. I think, Frank, you were talking about the movies of that time period with like Stallone and Arnold and all those guys in those movies. They were one man armies, right? They'd go in and they'd do all the killing and do all the whatever action scenes, and that really spoke, I think, to that kind of that generation of men of like, I'm going to do everything on my own. I have to do this to prove my manhood type of a thing. And I think Jordan kind of embodied that as well, right? I mean, he was very much about himself. He was very much about doing whatever it took to win. And I think a lot of men from that generation actually latched onto that perspective. And we even talk about it today, right? LeBron is not as good because he's willing to pass the ball, right? I mean, he's going to pass the ball to a guy to take the shot because it's the right move. But Jordan was like, no, I'm going to shoot the ball myself, and I'm going to carry that weight of making it or not on myself. And I think that even speaks into that one. I think it was a commercial. I remember seeing it as a poster, and it might have been in my math class in high school. But it was like the reason he was successful is because he failed so many times, and like he took that burden on himself of like, hey, I failed, and therefore I'm going to be successful, and he turned those failures into success from that very like individualistic perspective. Like he wasn't really allowing a whole lot of people to speak into his life. I mean, Phil Jackson was the one guy. He was like, all right, I'll listen to him. But how many other GMs and coaches and dudes was he allowing to give him advice on how to play, right, or do anything in life? But I really think that was one of the big things that he indirectly kind of lived out, was that hyper individualistic approach to basketball and life.
What you got, Seth?
So I wanted to piggyback on a little bit what Michael said. So it was when he talks about Phil Jackson was the only person that he could trust, is because, and Jordan talks about it, Phil Jackson had to prove that he was a winner, right? And I made this up, and I'll never forget this. I was probably 6 or 7. I'm playing youth ball, NJB, and Jordan's talking about, I think that exact same quote about losing, right? And at that point, I told myself, if you're afraid, or the fear of losing is the fear of success, right? Because what Jordan has taught everybody is that losing is part of that deal, right? To wallow in that loss is when you successfully have lost, right? You successfully become a loser. When it comes to, the broader sense of what masculinity is, right? Jordan starts talking about, or not even so much talking about, he starts acting upon, the emotional stoicism, right? The competitive nature comes out on the court, and people will talk about it like, hey, we will talk trash to Jordan, and just stone cold face, and he's going to give you that glare like, okay, it's like that, huh? Right? And it's never Very rarely you can see Jordan in the middle of fights. People fought for him, right? He wasn't that guy. Very rarely you can see Jordan turning to the crowd, Reggie Miller-esque, given that kind of stuff, because Jordan's like, hey, I'm going to kill you on the court for 50 plus points, and then I'm going to go shake your hand and tell you there's not going to be a game 6, right? And, even more so, like when we start talking, expansive of what that means for Jordan, there are touches of Michael being more than just a competitor. And his addiction was competing, right? And hence the whole addiction of gambling. But when he talks about his father, you could see real sincerity there. When he talks about his sons, you could see real sincerity there. And this is where I believe Jordan now becomes multidimensional. He becomes layered, right? He's not just the competitor. But in the same sense, right, what people remember about that is when he talks about his father and his father's kindness, it's usually in relationship to his athletics. When he talks about his sons, it's in relationship to their athletics, right? And that, I think is probably paints a bigger picture of who Michael Jordan was and his actual problem with competitiveness. And as fans, we love it, right? As fans, we love the fact that he's trying to win at every little thing that he does, but how that affects his life, I think that's something that we jump into later. But more so, I think we all, especially those people who grew up in that era, and you touched on it a little bit too, Caleb, was about, how many people actually liked him. And in The Last Dance, he's like, I don't care who liked me. Can you help me win? Right? His brotherhood was just in that locker room, and we don't have to like each other. We just can't lose. Right? And that was his overall mantra as he continued to walk forward. So we talk about masculinity, that would be it. As far as what he projected was, hey, winning is the ultimate goal. No matter how you get there, you got to get there. If you need 4 other guys to get there, then okay, I'm going to need 4 other guys to get there. And you see that in the way that he accepts the Scottie Pippens, the Dennis Rodmans, the Ron Harpers onto his team. But a lot of those guys, he punched Steve Kerr in the face, so a lot of those guys, may not have complete fond memories, but when you see Michael Jordan talk about his 6 rings, he talks about it like that's the pinnacle of his life. He talks about it in the same, the same reverence as, or I should say reverence, the same emotional capacity as he talks about with his sons, right? So he puts it up there as far as interpersonal relationships. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I think onto that point, I'll jump for there and then we'll pass it to Frank. But I think on that point, as far as things about masculinity, what's coming to mind is what he says in, we're just going to quote Last Dance like this whole time, aren't we? But in that bit where he's speaking to when his father passed, and kind of some of the core messaging that his dad tried to teach him was, you turn a negative into a positive. Like point blank. Like that seems to be the biggest thing that James Jordan, his father, really wanted to like instill into him. And you definitely kind of see that where obviously when he wins ring number 4, his father had been, tragically passed. And there is this moment right when he wins, and I forget, I'm going to butcher his exact words, but he essentially says, this is for you, Daddy. Like talking about his own father and that experience there. And then, at least for me, and I'm cutting ahead a little bit to how he personally impacts and that sort of thing. But the segment that really, really touched me and I feel like speaks a lot to masculinity is all this bravado that we've been talking about, right? Him being a Stallone, Schwarzenegger type on the court, right? Can't be beat. The alpha. wins ring number 4, well, any of his rings for that matter, but especially number 1 and number 4. The dude is a mess. The amount of emotion that comes out. A lot of times, if you look up high sensitivity, like as a therapeutic concept or as a something that people carry, MJ's on this list. Which you would be like, what? That doesn't make sense. Like, what do you mean him being sensitive? But at the end, when you see how, with those rings in mind, all of this emotion pours out, and he is like inconsolable, almost like, and I don't say this disrespect at all, it's more something I truly admire, but almost like sobbing in this fetal position. I won this ring. My dad's not here. So just that ability of I can win, and I can win with dominance. And when the camera's still on, I can show all of that emotion. Someone spoke to stoicism earlier. I can reveal all of that emotion on this side of things. I don't care. I won. It's all coming out. And I think that it's not words, but I think it is emotion that he's kind of demonstrating. That on the court and when he's handling his business, like with a work ethic, there was an interview I was listening. He said, "Work ethic eliminates fear." It's like, oh man, there we go. That's you can stay with that one. That's a good one. But there was so much of that emotion that comes pouring out, and there's this person that had so much. You know, when we say, "Oh, he took it personal," he took it personal. He's not just saying that. I think he really did. And I think that's what drove him to be as good as he was. But yeah, that's what I got. What you think, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he whether or not he admitted it or like he embodied, 90s masculinity. When you're talking about him crying, it literally was the only acceptable time to cry, right? Men weren't allowed to cry unless you won a Super Bowl, your wife died, or, like that's basically it. Like, it's got to be like manly things, right? Like, so him winning, even though, when his father got murdered, him winning a championship, that was like, yeah, because that's a masculine thing to do in their sport, so it was socially acceptable to start crying during those times. I mean, he was such the embodiment of masculinity. The commercials were made over him, be like Mike, like that's who we were supposed to be like. There wasn't any like nuance here. It's, and they had little kids dribbling the basketball and shooting, in these commercials, and it was just be like Mike. That's it. So, as far as like the masculine thing, he embodied, the I carry all of the weight, right? Like even when his team was losing, he didn't trust anyone with the ball. It's my show. As we now all, I feel like I'm not sure about everyone's background, but especially you and I, Caleb, like we're married, we know like it's relationship, right? Like we don't carry all the weight or all the everything inside this relationship, right? We share that burden. Basketball teams now share that burden, right? Like the best ones are like duos that we see, healthy duos like Klay Thompson and Steph Curry. Like we see these duos, people sharing burdens. We see the Olympics now, people sharing medals. Michael Jordan would have never shared a medal. That would have been out of the question. Like, we're tied. Okay, we're gonna go one more round. Like, there's no way, we're sharing this. Like, I'm not sharing anything. That's as good as second place to me. So there's a lot of kids who grew up. There's a lot of men who watched Michael Jordan, who saw masculinity in him and embodied that and projected that on their lives. I feel like there's a lot of men who are now divorced, probably because they wanted to be that, right? Like I don't know how many kids were abused because the fathers wanted their kids to be like Mike. I remember playing on a basketball team and a kid just wasn't playing well. I don't even remember what the excuse, but his dad, who was the coach, told him, be a man. Michael Jordan played at 100-degree fever. You need to be a man. The kid's 11 years old. I think he can sit down. I think he's good. But, these are the things I think that are toxic about what Michael Jordan did. But, there were also some good things where it's like, sometimes you got to be responsible for. certain situations. And Michael Jordan did take on that burden. He didn't take losing as an option. And sometimes in our lives, we have to take responsibility and say, like, hey, like, I can create my own and my own path towards my goals. That is something I think that is very positive we can take from him. But creating the enemies, creating the isolation, emotional isolationism that he had created around him are probably things we can dump off. So I think those are some of the things that he speaks on when it comes to masculinity is the emotional isolationism, which is a negative. I think the positive would have been probably something like I said before, like where you create your own pathway to your own goal. Like there are certain things that are unattainable at first, but once you continue to working, I don't remember what you just said, Caleb, with work ethic. But like you have to create this. You have to continue to work in order to reach your goals, and I think that's something Michael Jordan definitely did.
100%. Is there any? We all had a little bit of spicy-ish takes from what we were saying. Is there anyone that you want to pick up on something that other folks have said, or do we move on to the next question?
Can I jump in? It wasn't necessarily anything someone said, but I think it spawned some more thought. And I want to throw out there is it might have been Seth was talking about the gambling problem, the competitiveness that comes with all of that kind of stuff. And it got me thinking about a lot of that addiction type behavioral stuff that people and men, or I mean women too, but in this context, guys, they exhibit these addiction tendencies. And from my reading that I've done and research, a lot of that stuff is born out of a trauma. And so when a person has trauma, they look for coping mechanisms, they look for things to help find a regulation for themselves. And so you have with like the Jordan type, you have this crazy blend of like, I don't know his background per se, his childhood, but you throw in more than likely a traumatic background, trauma-based environment, creates a narcissistic type personality who then has to find comfort through all of these different mechanisms because he doesn't know how to find it himself. He wasn't given that as a child. Whether through his mom or his dad, and this is all just kind of my thought process. But you see how far that goes, that trauma effect in a person goes. It takes you, it can take you to the quote unquote pinnacle of sports and be the champion of champions. But it also can be a driving force for a person. And I think about kind of my own journey of like, do I want to have hate or trauma or ego being the driving force for any successes in my life? Or do I want to be doing those things out of a genuine pursuit of authenticity or love for myself and for other human beings? And kind of rewiring that for myself and learning to go, okay, how do I do these actions out of an action of self-love or love for other human beings as opposed to I just want to be the greatest athlete or the greatest whatever the heck that a person does. So I think that kind of that trauma background plays a major role in his life that might not get touched on enough. Again, that's my hunch, my assumption. I don't know the guy. I haven't done any research into that stuff, but if you look at that competitiveness, that ego, that addiction, gambling type stuff, those all seem to be signifiers for me for that kind of a background.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And that's just from playing experience, being in athletics now as an adult. And I'll never forget this, right? So my freshman year of college, right? My coach, he's yelling at one of my teammates. And because you talk about the trauma, I think instinctively we all kind of know that this is true, right? And I'll never forget this. As a freshman, he yells at my teammate and he goes, "You have both parents in your household, don't you?" And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, because you play like it. You play like you've had a meal every night. You play like you have a warm bed and you haven't had to share a room. That's how you play, right?" And in contrast, I had a player literally, right, and I believe he went Division One. He was on the opposite side, so I happened to be on offense and he was on defense, and Frank could attest to this. Guys in the apartment building in candlelight doing his homework, right? Like he knew that sports was his only way out of his situation, and he played like it, right? And At the end of the day, I was a NCAA Division III athlete, and that guy went D1. But and I'm not saying that it was just solely that, but I think there is a lot of truth to what you're saying, Michael. And we and I say we as in like a society, we kind of know this, right? Like, and it's not just in sports. It's not just Michael Jordan. You could go look at a lot of highly successful individuals, whether they're artists or athletes or tech geniuses. They typically come from a background where not everything was given to them and they had to go take it, right? And they used that mechanism, whatever that may be, as a means to cope with whatever they were dealing with, right? To be accepted by society, to be accepted by the peers around them, right? That was their tool or mechanism to be integrated and to feel normal. Yeah, I would 100% agree with that.
Isn't this kind of? I don't know if I'm the only one thinking this, but isn't that kind of like I don't know if it's upsetting or just like satirically like funny. Like I hear all these issues that Michael Jordan with the gambling issues, the isolationism, and I'm like, yeah, but he still ended up being the GOAT. So I mean, like, are we excusing this behavior? Because I still look up to him. It's like, I guess that's just like something the society just looks into. Because I'm just like, yeah, but he's still the best. Like I'd love to meet the guy.
Right.
Well, and to this point about like the trauma of it all, like he's spoken to this pretty directly. I was competing with my brother Larry for my dad's love. Like that's verbatim. Like I'm not paraphrasing. I'm pretty sure he said that very directly. And then not to mention he's talked about on and off. I mean, truth be told, I feel like he doesn't speak on issues of race that often, but he has described how, growing up in Wilmington, and then it's weird. It's like these ... He doesn't like pepper in a lot, but obviously I'm assuming that his and his family's experience of like racism and prejudice and systemic disruptions and blockades, and we're not too far removed from the civil rights era and all that sort of stuff right as he's coming up. So it's not just that it was in his family where there was an element of, we don't even know if the trauma was really, really bad as far as, him competing for his father's love. That's something he kind of describes as what drove him to be this incredible competitor. But obviously, yeah, having an upbringing, being a black man in the South in the 60s, he doesn't speak to it a lot, but I'm assuming that was quite the adversity as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm guessing we will touch this on later on, but like that's a good segue of what, what the converse is of of masculinity, what somebody, and you can't describe masculinity and the issues within masculinity without acknowledging that everybody's going to have somewhat of a different definition of masculinity, and that's going to be likely defined from how you were raised in the situations that you were raised in, right? Masculinity isn't necessarily, and we all have backgrounds in psychology, so we know that these things aren't necessarily inherently biological. There's a lot of social factors that jump into this thing that shape who we are as men. So yeah, I think that's like that right there, I believe, is the crux of what this conversation is about. Because when we start talking about Michael Jordan, it's not necessarily his greatness. We know he's great, right? It's whether or not his form of masculinity is the masculinity that he projected is, healthy or not, right? Like, is that something that we, can co-sign?
Yes, that topic was very, very rife. There were so many different things that we could go over with that. Well done. It's kind of in the same vein, and we've touched on this a bit, so I'm guessing we'll hit this question for a bit and then move on to the next. But the key question here is, but why do we think this fellow in question was as influential as he was? It is, right? We have hinted at this very directly, indirectly, a lot. But the other question with that is, has the influence grown? Has it diminished? And then, yeah, why or why not? So at this point, if you've got something, you can just hop right in and chime in.
I think of the he's the ultimate success. The winningest basketball player in modern era, Bill Russell and those guys aside, he's made a gazillion dollars. He's got the yacht, he's got all the stuff, and there's a again, everything with this guy is extreme. So he's on the extreme side of success, and I think a lot of men want to be successful. Like, there's always that joke in society of like, don't be the guy who's living in your mom's basement playing video games, right? Like that's the far end of like that's loserville, right? And so you've got this idea that like you as a man you need to be providing, you need to be successful, you need to be a producer of something in some capacity as a man. And I think he was on that far side of that, right? Again, billionaire. I don't know what his. I think this we get on this a little bit later. I don't know his relationship in terms of women. A lot of pro athletes are very promiscuous. I don't know what his background is in that, but again, culturally speaking, there's a lot of guys who are like, I want to be with lots of different women and all that kind of stuff. And I think he's very much in that space of like the hyper idealized version of what a quote unquote American man is supposed to be in those areas. So my 2 cents for that.
Frank, you want to touch on that? Right.
Well, I mean, I think his influence, in my opinion, has stagnated a bit because I don't know if he can get any bigger. I mean, maybe he can. He's Michael Jordan. But I mean, you got the shoe. You got the brand. Like the Michael Jordan brand is a staple of basketball, right? Like even these kids who have never seen an NBA game that he was in still want Jordans. Still are wearing like his logo on their shirts. Like the guy is just everything. And as Michael was saying, like billionaire. Like this guy is just he was successful at everything. Why was he as influential in the 90s? I mean, he was so much better than anyone we've ever seen before him. Like we never could imagine that type of greatness. Even now, 30 years later, we're still debating, has anyone even touched it? Like this is how good this man was. And he was ego driven. Like we're talking about this embodiment of masculinity. All of this greatness was ego driven, and we loved it. We loved every second of it. We all know the Michael Jordan stare, right? Like the game's over. As soon as he gives you that look, it's over. Like we knew when he was going to take the last shot. No one was going to take the last shot but him. Like we knew this. He had that killer instinct. The closest thing to that killer instinct was Kobe Bryant, and he kind of had that same look, right? So the influence is there, and the model is there, right? Kobe Bryant modeled this guy. All of these players now model him. Michael Jordan practically didn't model anyone. Michael Jordan was one of one. Like you can say Dr. J and all those things kind of had influences on him, but when you look at game, like you're not going to find a side by side like you did with Kobe Bryant. Right, like where he's doing the same moves as somebody else. Michael Jordan was one of one. He's always going to be one of one, and that's why it made him so unique. We saw something so different in this man, with the ego and backed up that ego, and it made him larger than life. And that's what I think was like so amazing about watching this guy. It was like, what other heights is he going to achieve? Then we saw him go into the Olympics, which is why I think the 92 Dream Team is probably the greatest of all time, because we saw him matched up against other men who had different ideas of masculinity across the world and just destroyed them. He was so good. He changed worldwide basketball. People around the world wanted to be him because they were destroyed by him. Like that's how good he was. So when we talk about like the influence and why he was so influential is because he was good at destroying people, like embarrassing them in the last seconds, embarrassing them all game and not having an issue with it and telling everyone that he was going to do it, yeah, that's why he was good, man.
I think that we're all taught to be the alpha. We all want to be the alpha. The problem is there's one alpha. So in a lot of spaces, right, especially when you get more competitive, more talented, more skilled, right? This is where we see in a lot of professional teams in sports, there's issues, there's tension. Who's number one? Who's number two? That sort of thing. Kind of to Frank's point, on those Bulls teams, Scottie was really good. We can't deny that. Scottie was so good. But there's one alpha. There was one guy. That was it. And I think that it's funny that you mentioned Kobe, because I'm like, yeah, they personality essentially the exact same, one extroverted, one introverted. But other than that, pretty much the same. Same kind of dude, same kind of mentality, same kind of way that they played. But yeah, just that sense of, we all carry this innate notion that we need to be the guy. And I can't think of another person ever. I have this huge ass list of all of these men that we're going to review, and he's the only one that I would say is the guy of so many influential spaces in whatever that, that topic may be, or whatever their realm of expertise. In basketball, there is no other the guy like him. Period.
Speaking of Kobe Bryant, like mimicking Michael Jordan, because he was the closest to MJ, like he was so good at basketball, they gave him an Oscar for it. Something also LeBron James hasn't done.
Man, any LBJ lovers are gonna hate this pod. They're gonna blacklist this pod and do all this comments.
I argue with my guys all the time about that. So, to touch, I am going to touch on the LBJ stuff, but when it comes to this, about his influence growing, and again, I'm in athletics. I will tell you with 100% certainty that his influence has not stagnated. It has only grown, right? And this is how I know it has. Because there is this phrase, and, these Gen Zs and stuff, they know it. It's called, or they say, we done with the 90s, right? It's because they no longer want to talk about Michael Jordan. They no longer want to, they want to have their own heroes. And the fact is none of their heroes are as good as Michael Jordan, right? And I'll never forget this. we were traveling on a bus. It's a 3-hour drive. And I am the sole guy defending, 90s basketball, specifically the greats in 90s basketball, right? And so any objective person could say the NBA is more skilled today, right? So as a coach, I always tell people skills don't equate to wins, right? James Harden is technically more skilled than Michael Jordan. Nobody's picking James Harden before Michael Jordan. Not a soul on this planet, past, present, or future, right? And that's something I try to convey to guys. This is why what made these guys great. And I use Shaquille O'Neal as an example, and I'll jump back to Michael Jordan. But I use Shaquille O'Neal as an example. That guy had 3 moves, and my brothers heard me say this. He had 3 moves, and basically he grabbed the ball and he said, "Stop me." Right? You have the scout. You know what he's going to do. He's going to do a few dribbles backing up. He'll do a drop step dunk. Maybe he'll do a hook, in the middle, right? Or he's just going to grab you and put you to the back to the rafters, right? And when I talk about Shaquille O'Neal, and I tell my brother this too, he's the greatest center of all time. And how do I know this? Because he dunked on 5 dudes, right? He dunked on the entire team. I was until you could show me a picture of somebody dunking on 5 guys, don't talk to me about Shaquille O'Neal, right? And it's the same, I feel the same for Michael Jordan, right? It's so you try to have these rivalries today, right? You try to say, Jokic versus who, right? LeBron versus who, right? There was no rivalry. Jordan created rivalries. Jordan was oh, you think Reggie Miller is in the conversation for MVP? Okay, I'm gonna drop 40 on him, right? And on top of that, he would guard him. And I'll never forget this when we talk about greatness. And don't worry, I'm getting back to the 90s thing. When we talk about greatness, Kobe Bryant slapped the floor in front of Michael Jordan, and everybody knew what it was. They were going one-on-one. It was an all-star game. They were going one-on-one, and you could see at that point when Kobe Bryant did that, the all-star game went from here to here. And then everybody started playing, right? And at the end of the All-Star game, you know, there's I'm sorry, when Jordan's on his essentially his last dance at the end of the All-Star game, Kobe Bryant hit the game-winning shot. And Michael Jordan respected him more for it because Kobe's like, you're going to have to earn this. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how great you are. That was a great shot back there, but you're going to have to make that. And Jordan respected him for it. But that's who Jordan is, right? Jordan, right now, at 60-something years old, would still want to take that last shot. And I explained to these guys, like, when you say, hey, we done with the 90s, we're not talking about the role players. We're talking about the greats of the greats. We're talking about Shaquille O'Neal. We're talking about, you know, Michael Jordan. And I know some of these guys were later in the 2000s, stuff like that, but we're talking about like the KGs, right? And even James Worthy, you know, in this sense, he retired after Magic Johnson and he was Michael Jordan's teammate, right? He was much better than most other people would have guessed, but we talked about the alpha. Magic Johnson was clearly the alpha on that team, right? And I saw a clip of a guy doing an up and under and he dunked it. And I remember the caption said, if Michael Jordan did this in the 90s or the internet existed in the 90s, it would go viral. And my response to that was, this was Wednesday for Michael Jordan, right? Like, that was, you tuned in to Michael Jordan because you wanted to see that, all right? And it's not that Michael Jordan couldn't do it. And these guys are talking about, I could have played with Michael Jordan in that era. No, you couldn't have. Michael Jordan at 60 years old is at a kid's birthday party and he's still going to sink a free throw, not even touching the rim, you know, and hasn't touched a basketball in 10 years, right? Michael Jordan, when he stepped onto the court, this is after the entrance music and everything like that, his eyes, I compare it to Mike Tyson, his eyes went directly to who he was going to demolish in that game, right? So Michael Jordan was that guy. And we're not talking, and I'm a Lakers fan, so we're not talking about Pig Miller, right? And you could go check him out. He was a role player on the Los Angeles Lakers. We're not talking about the Eldon Campbells, rest in peace, right? We're not talking about the AC Greens and guys like that. We're talking about the stars. You know, can your stars match up to this guy? No, absolutely not. And the fact that you have a we done with the 90s means that you're still thinking about him. It means that you're still comparing your game to him. And to, you know, Frank's point, I believe that it was Frank that brought it up, was, you know, Michael Jordan wanted to take the last shot and Kobe Bryant was a reflection of Michael Jordan. There's this story of Kobe Bryant when he went to the Olympics on the Redeem team and he's talking to LeBron James. And he tells LeBron James, why did you pass that ball? And LeBron James says, well, because that guy was open. It was the right play. And Kobe says, I don't care if it was the right play. Why would you pass it to somebody who's worse than you? Right? Like, that was the mentality. I'm better than everybody else on the court, so therefore nobody else could take a shot better than me right now. And that was Kobe's mentality. And Kobe has 5 and Bron has 4. So, you know, these are the things where I think Michael Jordan's influence continues to impact, because just in that moment, Michael Jordan influenced Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant tried to influence LeBron James, and these guys want the LeBron James to be at that level. And what I tell everybody is this, skill-wise, LeBron James's floor is higher than Michael Jordan's. Michael Jordan's ceiling is higher than LeBron James. Right? So LeBron James could do a little bit more. Like, he's a better passer than Jordan, a better rebounder, things like that. But when the game's on the line, you're picking Michael Jordan. And today's era knows this. They just don't want to admit it. Otherwise, there'd be no such thing as we done with the 90s.
He just did a tour de force of making sure that anyone 25 or younger is not going to like this conversation.
Hey, they can
even though it's
me.
True. Yeah, I was gonna say we are biased because we're all from the millennials. We grew up with MJ, but that doesn't change the fact that he's better. That's that.
No, I'm actually looking forward to the day someone is better than him. Like, that makes basketball better. It just hasn't happened, right? Like, I was hoping for LeBron James to be that person, and it just hasn't happened, right? Like, jumping from team to team. You know, Jordan wouldn't do that because he's like, no, I'm gonna beat everybody. Like, I don't want to like join somebody else when I'm better than them. Like, you know, and he did it. He did 6 rings. Truthfully, he probably could have had 7, 8, or 9. You know, if he didn't spend his time in the White Sox. You know, if he didn't go for baseball for a couple of years, that dude might have won 7 in a row. You know, he's the GOAT for the reason.
We have cemented this. Oh, what you got, Michael?
I was just gonna add just one story to his influence. I was thinking of this while we were talking, and I scrolled through my text messages from back in the day. I had a family member, I think it was in springtime of 2021. They were in Florida, and this is a family member who doesn't pay attention to sports. They're like, "What's the Super Bowl?" kind of a thing, right? Like they have no knowledge, no care about any of that stuff at all, right? They have their own life. They do, and they sent me a picture of this guy and some girl walking. They were like, my family member was having lunch or something outside, and sent a picture, and it was Michael Jordan and his new wife, and they were just walking through the area somewhere in Florida, I believe. And I was like, that my family member who doesn't know anything about any sports or anything, literally knew who that guy was and was like, I just saw Michael Jordan, snapped a picture and sent it to me. Like, that just tells you all you need to know. Like, how influential this guy is and how recognizable he is, that he can break all of those bounds of, like, you know, if you showed a picture of Anthony Edwards, like, you would have to know who he is, right? Yeah. But Jordan, like, whole nother stratosphere of influence and knowledge and people who know who he is.
All right, we're going to call this the 15-minute glazing MJ.
Which
I'm here for. I'm here for. Yeah, I'm all here for it. And again, we're ostracizing the Gen Zers, but sorry, fam. You need to transcend. You need to transcend like our guy did. And maybe Wemby will. Michael loves Wemby. Maybe.
My guy.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Wemby actually looks. Yeah, he looks promising.
Yeah, Wemby. Yeah.
All right. So we have definitively stated how influential this guy is. So now we're on to the next topic. Kind of switching gears a little bit. How would we say his masculinity interacts with women in his life and in his story? And the second part to that, what are those interactions? And in a way, it doesn't have to be direct. It can be more intangible or indirect from what we noticed. What does it say about healthy or unhealthy masculinity as it pertains to women?
This is actually one of the ones that I wanted to touch on, so I don't actually mind like starting on this. And this is, the reason why I say this, that I wanted to touch on this is because as a coach, this is huge. Right. And we talked about it a little bit before we started recording about where I wanted my dissertation to be, and this is right there with it. Michael Jordan, like a ton of athletes, right, definitely indulged with women, to put it lightly. And that is, I believe, how, especially us as millennials, were raised on what masculinity looks like. Have as many women as possible, right? And not just have as many women as possible, brag about it, right? Make sure people know that not only do you have a lot of women, but you have the best looking women, or you have the most famous women, or it might be an artist or an actor, actress or whatever, another athlete, right? So make sure that people know that you're the man, right? And that's how you show it. How did this mess with his life? He's not married. He's not married anymore, and he's had strained relationships with his kids at times. Because once you start having kids, especially when you start having kids, and this, even though I'm talking about it as a separate issue, it does intertwine, but it's not mutually exclusive, right? Once you start having kids, they are going to see how you treat their mom, right? So Mrs. Jordan is at home seeing her husband with other celebrities and other women, and now she's at home with the kids crying or is sad, or, because there was something there. Now, obviously, Jordan did not have the same deal. I've seen professional athletes, and I think this is something for another topic of discussion. But I've seen, because of my career choice, I've seen professional athletes have agreements with their spouses of, hey, pretty much anything goes, just don't embarrass the family, don't put it out in public, right? That's not what was the agreement for Michael Jordan. So that's, different in that sense. And masculinity isn't that. We talked about, alphas, right? And I do the air quotes because obviously, the gentleman who created that study for alphas, he's retracted it in the sense that there's not an alpha that's like the big mean, wolf pack dude, right? It's typically alphas tend to be women, but more so they tend to be the ones that provide protection and safety. Did people feel protected and safe around Michael Jordan? Probably not, right? And I think that is a bigger discussion to be had of what masculinity actually means. Did Michael Jordan project aspects of masculinity? Absolutely, right? These things do or can intertwine, but the way that you treat, the people closest to in your life are going to matter. In Jordan's case, does his sons, do they feel safe? Does his wife, or now ex-wife, does she feel safe? Do the people around him, his current wife now, does she feel safe? What does Michael Jordan think of Michael Jordan in his 20s now that he's in his 60s? And I think every man has to struggle with that. Me in my 20s, I tell everybody, I was like, I would be arguing with myself in my 20s, right? There's a couple of things that definitely has changed in our mindset, and you've grown. And so, like, for the young men that I coach, we talked about influence. That influence hasn't changed. Those athletes, still do those things. And it didn't necessarily start with Michael Jordan, but by the time Michael Jordan really started to be successful, right, you started to have ESPN, you started to have media follow around these athletes, and that's what we saw. And then, what does it say, about his, whether or not it's healthy or unhealthy masculinity? I would say in general, it is unhealthy as far as how we're going to project masculinity. There are things that even I had to correct course from my 20s being an athlete to now being a civilian and being somebody who has to interact on a regular basis to build relationships with women and people around me. When before, those were things that I didn't have to do because at 4:30 a.m., and this is Michael Jordan's, right? I mean, not exactly, but something similar. At 4:30 a.m., woke up, I jogged 2 miles to get to the weight room. 5 a.m. I was in the weight room from about 5 to 6-ish, just a little after 6. 6:30, I'm taking a shower. 7 and eating. I usually do whatever, but then 7 o'clock I had class. I had a 7 a.m. class because I had to get all my classes in so I could go to practice in the evening. 7 a.m. I had class, and then I would go to breakfast, and then after that I'd go to film, and then after film I'd get another workout in. So usually it's like sprints or plyos or whatever, and then I had practice, and then after practice, if I had another class, cool, but if not, I got my next workout in, which was like stadium stairs and hills and stuff like that. And then after that was the weight room for the second time. And then I get to go home and do my homework and go to bed. There is nothing in that schedule for me to build a relationship with women. There's nothing in that schedule for me to expand on my relationships with my family. In college, I barely saw my mom and dad. Right? I lived on campus, and I would have to talk or call my mother on the weekends because during the week, couldn't do it. And so Michael Jordan, you're talking about all that stuff. Did he create time to cultivate relationships while he was in his professional career? Probably not. And that's not masculine. That's not healthy masculinity.
I just want to be clear that Michael Jordan is married now, but you're speaking about his first wife, you're saying?
Yeah, his first wife. Yeah. The one that tried to take the Jordan brand.
As far as his version of masculinity, sorry, it obviously isn't conducive to especially current femininity. If you're going to be I don't even know if it like conforms to what we see as the toxic view of, the what do they call them now, trad wives and things. Like, I don't even know if this type of masculinity conforms to that. I mean, it might, but when we're talking about like women in general, and what we want to see as far as positive femininity, this does not intersect with that well. We do see his relationships everywhere crumbling. I mean, his number two guy, his Robin to his Batman, is still mad at the guy 30 years later, just because he's number two. And does Jordan call him up and be like, "Hey, dude, chill"? No, Jordan doesn't give a crap. Thanks for the 6 rings, bro. Like, and then we're looking at the way he treated his women. Like as Seth had said before, like, I don't think he cared, right? Like, his, not to the depths of, like, I feel like what we're trying to teach men on this podcast, about caring for women and caring for relationships and cultivating positive and healthy relationships. That's not necessarily what I think he did. I think, he did tear down his relationship with his wife. He did bury a lot of trauma, or burden a lot of trauma upon his children. There wasn't any room for any type of, I mean, we had spoken about how the only time we saw him like be emotional was after a game, after a championship game. At least with Kobe Bryant, we saw him with his kids. We saw him with his wife. Like, he took pictures with them. He was out with them. We didn't see that same type of. We never saw that with Michael Jordan. Even the depictions they had of him, like just pictures, anything, was him playing basketball, him in a jersey, him with Bugs Bunny. I don't even remember how his kids look. Like, I do know Kobe Bryant's children. I do know Kobe Bryant's wife. I have no clue how Michael Jordan's wife looks like. I'm sure there's pictures out there of her. I just, when I'm talking about like just being a fan, I have no clue how his family looks like. Like, I remember his kid being bullied. He was in high school, and he made a last second shot to win the game, and all the comments were, "Yeah, but I mean, Jordan did that." Like no one can even give this kid his props. So I don't think mimicking his type of masculinity is going to be conducive to any sort of relationship with any woman. I think that, it being a healthy relationship. I can't imagine me treating my wife in that way. I need to make space for her. I need to make time for her. I need to make space for, my entire family, because they keep me grounded. It's not simply just about an end game or a goal. And I think that's what it was for Jordan. And I think that's why we saw his life come apart once basketball was over. What was the goal at this point? Because he was super focused on something, and it was basketball. And it never prioritized anyone around him. It was always about his goals. So when you're retired, are you going to continue to ignore your wife? Are you going to continue to ignore your children? This type of masculinity does not blend well with relationships.
Yeah, I think Caleb and I were briefly talking about Jordan a week or so ago, and I started to share a story. And I was like, well, I got to save this for the pod. So it reminded me of, what year? It's like 2014 or something, somewhere in that era. He turned 50 years old. Sports Illustrated, I think it was Sports Illustrated, this author got exclusive access to follow him around for like a whole week. And it was like unprecedented access. Like, he literally went everywhere with Jordan for like the whole week. And I'm fuzzy on some of the details. But I remember reading this article because it was a big article. And in terms of quality of depth and like detail. But I remember, this guy basically was like, at the end of it, he was like, Jordan has two friends, his wife and his limo driver. No one else in his world exists. Like, everyone who comes in, they eventually leave and they're gone. And he had a wonderful story in terms of it depicting how essentially terrible of a person he is. He was on a flight. They were flying somewhere on his private jet. Can't remember if it was international or not. and everyone was asleep on the plane, and everyone was just doing their thing. Everyone was sleeping. He got up and he turned on music as loud as he wanted, like full blast, like music, and he just started listening to music, and it woke everybody up on the plane. And he just didn't give a shit. Like he just did not care that he bothered everybody else on the airplane. That he wanted to listen to music, and that's what he did. And so I think that like I could not imagine doing that as a human being. Like I'm so arrogant and egotistical about what I want to do that I am going to hinder everyone else's sleep. Like, oh my goodness, it just speaks to who he is on a relational aspect. He's all about himself. It always has been, which I think comes back to that trauma aspect. You know, when you have such a traumatic life, you don't know how to trust anyone, and therefore you cannot be vulnerable with people. And that vulnerability, I think, is what I think we're all trying to get at in terms of our own growth patterns for us as men, is being actually vulnerable with other people and other men. And he was incapable of that, right? The only times he was able to be vulnerable was when he achieved winning an NBA championship. And so if you look at it, like none of his friends exist. Like none of his teammates want to be around him. He doesn't want them around him. Literally no one is there except for his wife and his limo driver. And I vaguely remember something about he loves Western movies. So he can't sleep. He can only sleep to Western movies. Like that's how he falls asleep. He's so, in my opinion, he's so internally tormented that he cannot fall asleep naturally. He has to have something to distract him from all of the internal noise. And so, obviously, in my opinion, none of that stuff is healthy, right? I mean, just being so relationshiply broken in terms of like not wanting to care about anyone else, the inability to be vulnerable, and the inability to address the trauma, right? I mean, that's a man, right? Is someone to go, I'm going to address the problems in my life, and actually work on them. He just didn't, at least from my estimation, doesn't want to or try. He just wants to keep doing his thing because, again, he's the GOAT. He's been so wildly successful in doing what he's doing that he doesn't necessarily need friends, quote unquote. That's where I would entirely disagree, but that's kind of my estimation of him in terms of the relationship stuff, and I think that goes into women. I think it goes into teammates, friends, all of those things. He's just broken in that aspect. So
Yeah. In contrast, right? So I love the fact that Frank brought up Kobe Bryant and that type of masculinity. I'll never forget this because I use this story when I recruit. So the athletes that eventually are going to see this are going to recognize this, right? So I had an opportunity to work out with Kobe Bryant. And it sounds a lot cooler than it really is, just grabbing rebounds and passing it, okay? But this is after his first knee injury, and he talks about, and again, like the advancement. Obviously, there's an influence with Kobe Bryant, but he talks about how he goes home and his relationship with his family has been strained, right? Because for the first time in his life, he realizes, hey, basketball's going to end. And so one of the things that Kobe Bryant did, or I should say one of the first things he did, because he talks about he checked into therapy, and they started going back to school, right? Because, and you could see the evolution of Kobe Bryant towards the end there, where he starts, when people ask him, do you miss it? And he goes, no, I don't miss it. I gave it everything I got. And at the end of the day, I found fulfillment in other places, right? Coaching Gigi so he could still be competitive in that sense, but rebuilding a relationship with his wife and things like that. So, that I believe is healthy masculinity. To your point, Michael, and to Frank's point, is to confront the bad things about who you are. And those are always going to be the toughest questions, because then you have to admit, I'm kind of horrible, right? I think, Kobe Bryant was the evolution of that, and now we're seeing the evolution of that in Steph Curry, who's, arguably just as competitive as, Kobe Bryant, but he's going to do it with a smile, and he's going to do it with his baby girl on his lap, talking about how he just dropped 50-something points and 17 million threes in one game, right? But yeah, I think that's the crux of what masculinity is, at least what healthy masculinity is. And it starts with, I'm a bad person, or this aspect of me is bad.
I think kind of to wrap us, because we've all been, the last question that we normally answer is, how has this person affected our own masculinity? And really, truly, all of us have kind of spoken to it, at least at some level. And if you want to chime in after, you totally can. But the one thing that I feel like you're really hitting on, Seth, is that Kobe had a moment where he had a big moral failing, right? Like, we can just call it for what it was. But I think that in lieu of that, he looked in the mirror, he looked inward, he wanted to atone, he wanted to improve, right? That the improvement was not just this external thing, it turned into this internal thing. And so I feel like maybe what happened with MJ is that never really happened. We didn't talk too much about his gambling, right? We didn't talk too much about how some of that gambling involved figures that had done some pretty shady stuff, right? And really truly could have been a moment for him to pause, right? Like I was just saying before with Kobe, he had his moment. It made him pause, made him reflect, made him, I need to change. That didn't really happen for MJ, right? And like you said, it's sort of a bit of an evolution in a way. I mean, that's one thing that I would say, that I feel like they're not doing it perfectly by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel like modern players are trying to course correct with this. None of them perfectly, but in general, I feel like, trying to improve on that. But as far as just how the guy impacts me personally, I think that it's interesting because I struggled when I was in athletics. Being a person that was a little bit more hard on sleeve, a little bit more thin-skinned, I wanted to be like Mike, but then I really struggled because I didn't have that, like we've been talking about, like killer mentality and, screw all those guys and, all that kind of thing. I can admit I did not have that. But what I am kind of appreciating, or maybe taking as somewhat of a point of pride, or maybe a sense of confidence for myself, is that, like we've been saying, he was able to do that on the court. But then when it came to his family, when it came to his friends, when it came to people that were close to him, where are they? Where are they? Like, we're not really seeing them. But for me, relationships is everything. How I treat my wife is everything. How I treat my friends, how I treat my family. Like, if there's anything about masculinity, or if there's any moment where people close to me are going to call something out in me, or they want to encourage or to indict or to rebuke, I would want it to be about something in relationship. How I'm coming across to other people. Am I being helpful? Am I being hurtful? And so it's an area where I'm not like Mike, and I think I kind of am glad. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. If there's anything else y'all want to chime in and final thoughts or anything, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say I had the opposite experience as you, or I was the guy that, and this is, Frank could attest to this, I punched my brother in the middle of a game, because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. So I was the exact opposite. But how he influenced me professionally, Jordan, I tell everywhere I go now, and I've seen a lot of success coaching, I tell coaches, when we start recruiting, recruit guys who hate losing more than they love winning. And that's a Michael Jordan trait, right? So, and I found a lot of success in that. And then I also trust myself. We talk about masculinity, that when we recruit those guys, to allow them to understand that there's going to be a life after basketball. So I kind of had to balance that myself, because I had to go through it. And now as an older man, I try to pass those lessons on. You're allowed to still be competitive. You're allowed to still be the Michael Jordan on the court. But when you're off the court, be prepared, because it's going to end. So.
Also, we played basketball, Caleb, when we were like 8 years old, and I remember winning, so I'm 1-0.
Yes. Oh, awesome. All right, well, I think that's as good a place as any to wrap. Thanks, y'all, for listening.
Yep. Love you, Caleb.
Hey, y'all. Caleb here. Thank you for listening to our show today. Please like and subscribe wherever the heck you listen to pods. And make sure to follow us on all the socials at Influ-Men-Sirs. That is INFLU-men-Sirs. We'll see you next time. Peace.